But look, lots to get into this evening, and we're going to start our show a little bit differently, if you'll indulge us tonight. We've got an exclusive interview with the Tory party leader, Kemi Badenoch. Let's take a listen to what she has to say.
Kemi Badenoch, you were out supporting farmers yesterday in the cold and the rain. You also had a meeting with Jeremy Clarkson. He's become a bit of a sort of hero figure to farmers, hasn't he? Can you tell me what he said to you?
Well, it was a very good meeting. It was just before the rally. And he wanted to find out what the Conservatives were going to do about what Labour has done with the family farms tax. And I was explaining to him that we are the opposition now. We're not the government anymore. We don't have the numbers to reverse it, but we can hold them to account. And I talked about tactics which the farming community and rural communities, as well as everybody else in society who supports this campaign, can take in order to help to get a U-turn from Labour.
But what do you say to people who are not of the farming community, who think, well, 20% on 3 million plus over 10 years, that's not a bad deal. I have to pay 40% within 6 months and so on and so forth. Isn't it right that farmers should have to pay some inheritance tax?
I do think that everyone needs to pay their fair share of tax. This is not fair on farmers. What they are valuing at 3 million is land. It is not liquid income. You and I get taxed based on cash that's come in. This isn't cash that's being valued. It's land, which means that they have to sell bits of it in order to pay the inheritance tax. And as they sell, what they actually make is not enough because what they have to sell because what they actually make is not enough to pay those taxes. You can have £3 million in assets and make £25,000 a year. And then you have to pay so much that you have to just sell off the farm. The farm is your home. It's something that has been handed down from previous generations. And we are starting from first principles. You'll remember during the leadership contest, I said, we're not rushing out with policy. We start with what we believe. We believe in family. Conservative Party supports families that do the right thing, that work hard, that save, that stay rooted in their community, look after the environment. We will support them. We support property rights as well. This is really a way for the government to take away from those who have assets. They are asset rich and they are cash poor. And it's not agricultural property relief alone. It's also what they're doing with business property relief. So it's a double whammy for farmers. And we've got to stick up for them.
But there is a problem, isn't there, in that people have bought up large swathes of land and it has been free of inheritance tax. To give you the obvious example, James Dyson owns 36,000 acres, £612 million in agricultural assets. And he'd be potentially looking at a £120 million bill. Surely somebody like him should have to pay tax.
Not every farmer is James Dyson. So attacking everyone to try and get at one person, in my view, is not the right way of doing things. But also, look at the amounts that we're talking about that's being raised. The amounts that the government itself has estimated it'll raise will maybe cover about one day's worth of NHS spending. Yet look at the big pay rises that they've given the unions. Look at how they have created new problems with their GB energy nonsense. It's not going to work. They are creating problems not just for today, for the future. They won't raise the money that they think they'll raise. A lot of people are just going to give up and stop farming. And then what happens to our food security? Let's remember what farmers do. This is public service. They may be privately owned, but without farmers, there is no food. So we need to start looking at farming in the whole, not just as a place to grab money from.
But farmers have been very unhappy for a long time. They were protesting. They brought their tractors to Westminster just back in March under the Conservative government, unhappy about net zero, about red tape, about food prices, how much they're squeezed by the supermarkets. Farmers feeling they're getting a rough deal is nothing new. That was the case under your government too, wasn't it?
You are absolutely right. Farmers feel, and I agree with them, that they've been getting a rough deal for a long time. I am a net zero skeptic. I bang on endlessly about red tape, and I have said very publicly that we need to reduce the burdens that we pay on farmers. Every day in Parliament, somebody has a new bright idea about, something nice that could be done without thinking about who pays the consequence. And this is one of the things that is going to change under my leadership. I have said that we got a lot of things wrong previously. So I'm not here to try and bring back the Conservative Party that the public just kicked out. I am here to bring a new Conservative Party, a renewed Conservative Party, one that sticks to its principles, that is authentic, and that does right by the British people, including farmers.
But what about how supermarkets squeeze prices down? Do you think food is actually a bit too cheap in this country because it's more expensive when you go abroad?
So it depends on where abroad you go. If you go to the US, it's not more expensive. This is a far more complex question because we don't want people to be spending all of their income on food, but we also want farmers to be able to make a profit and not make their lives too hard. There is a better way. We had, for instance, a groceries adjudicator which helped supermarkets in terms of the way that they were treating farmers. I think there's a lot more that we can do there. But right now, what's happening with these new taxes is not going to be good for supermarkets either. Because if farmers stop producing food, they're going to have fewer suppliers, and that's going to bring costs up. So it is in the interests of all of us, not just farmers, but supermarkets, politicians, and everyone out there, whether they live in a rural area or an urban area, to support this campaign. We need to stop this family farms tax.
Labour say that they've had to make these difficult decisions because of the state of the public finances.
This is nonsense.
They inherited. But the Conservatives, you did choose to take 4p off national insurance at a time that there wasn't much money around. Now, you didn't get really any credit for that from the voters, but that was expensive. And because Labour didn't want to row back on that, that's meant they've had to make other choices. Some of this, surely, is on the previous government.
No, they didn't have to make the choices that they have made. This GB Energy boondoggle is an expensive mess that's not going to raise any money. They are choosing to create problems for later. And the other thing that they're doing that's really bad is that they are raising the cost on jobs. I have already spoken to employers, including some young farmers. Yesterday I spoke to a 23-year-old farmer who said he's going to stop employing the 18 and 19-year-olds because of the national insurance rise. So next year, there are going to be fewer employers, fewer jobs, the tax take will shrink, and then they'll try and come back for more. This is just the beginning of what Labour is doing. They are coming back for more soon.
And just finally, on a different topic, it is being reported that British-made Storm Shadow missiles have been fired into Russia. What's your view on that? Should we be concerned about World War III?
We should always be concerned. The world is becoming a much more dangerous place. And I would like to see de-escalation, but that needs to start with the Russians, who are the aggressor in this conflict. I believe that supporting Ukraine is the right thing. If Russia wins this war, they will not stop there. This is a proxy war that Ukraine is fighting on behalf of the rest of Europe, and I think we need to do everything we can to support them.
So if those missiles have been fired into Russia, you're supportive of that?
This is not an easy thing. We would like it for there not to be any war. But getting concerned about a war being fought using British missiles at a time when we believe that Ukraine is fighting for all of Europe, in my view, is not the right way to look at things. Do we want Ukraine to win this war or not? And are we prepared to support them to win this war? That is what I believe.
Kemi Badenoch, thanks so much for talking to us today for GBNews.
Thank you, Catherine.
We've just been listening to an exclusive interview there with Kemi Badenoch, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on what you just heard. Get in touch with me and I'll bring you into the conversation. There's lots that we need to discuss. She was very passionately supporting the farmers there. She was talking about going back to Conservative first principles. She was also talking as well in response to the prospects of a World War III. Goodness gracious me, lots to unpick. One of my key takeaways there was her use of the word boondoggle. I quite like that word. I'm going to start trying to use it. And then you pointed out the cousin to that word. What is it? Hornswoggle. Hornswoggle. We could do a whole segment, couldn't we, just on peculiar words that people do not use enough. But for now, we'll get into...
It's a good way of not being specific if you're in politics.
Yeah, just like that word.
So if you say something as a boondoggle, or if you use words such as the very commonly used word sleaze, you don't say anything that anybody can accuse you of...
Oh, yeah, but sleaze, I hear that so often.
Yeah, but it's a very useful
now.
word because it's not likely to cause defamation action.
Oh, well,
some other words might, but sleaze doesn't.
Let me ask you then, let's get into the specifics of what she said. So she's very critical of the Labour Party's position when it comes to farming. She stands firmly in the corner of the farmers. Of course, she was at that rally yesterday as well. What did you think to that, Peter Hitchens?
I thought it was boondoggle. I think fundamentally she's not really levelling, and it's interesting the way she now says, well, we don't really have to have any policy now with the opposition. Is a standard answer to almost every question at what she would do. And in this case, what would they do? The Conservative Party was deeply involved in the enormous spending of money during the great panic over COVID, which is the ultimate cause of all these incredibly high taxes and devastating inflation which we've faced. And they've never disowned that or admitted that it was wrong. And we're in this mess because of a turn to very heavy state spending. And they are not in any way, she spoke of her principles, they're not in any principled way opposed to high taxation. If you are a Conservative, it seems to me that you should find the whole idea of people's inheritance being taxed repulsive. If people have spent all their lives paying tax, as they do on their income, and have managed to save at the end of it a certain amount of money, or have managed to buy land for a farm, then what is it? Why should the government have any business taking it away from them? And it may well be. I know that there was one Labour minister over the past couple of days spoke of the government returning the farmers' money returning to the state when they die. Well, that's obviously they think all money comes from the state. Conservatives do not think all money comes from the state, and they should be wholly opposed to the idea of people having their hard-earned money snitched by the state when they die. But there's no hint of actual outrage in anything she says about this procedure. She doesn't think, gosh, people have worked all their lives for this, now it's going to be taken away by the state and spent on who knows what, bombing Russia perhaps. And it isn't a Conservative position, and there doesn't seem to me to be any trace in Kemi Badenoch's behaviour or words of any new departure from the bland, principle-free world of political conservatism.
Owen has been in touch and said Kemi is a practical engineer. She always will attack things from principles, he says, and he happens to like that approach. David says, how refreshing to listen to that interview with Kemi Badenoch, with her clear and precise answers to questions. He says he reckons that a few politicians could learn a thing or two from Kemi Badenoch. Also, Peter just mentioned COVID. Something that caught my eye today. You know, the COVID investigation, the inquiry that we're having, it's set to cost how much money? In fact, I'll tell you after the break. Do you know how much money the COVID inquiry is projected to cost? You won't believe your eyes and ears when I tell you. I'll tell you after the break. But for now, what do you think to the Kemi Badenoch interview you had?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Peter in a lot of it. I think she talks about principles. She says that's the first thing the Conservatives need to, nail down before they can start talking about policy. But the problem with that is that actually the Conservatives were in power for 14 years, and the last 2 years of it with them just arguing about what exactly it is they should stand for. I mean, they really should have that figured out by now. And we saw in the last couple of years of the Conservatives' reign that they actually didn't have much in the way of policy. They weren't be able to pass anything useful through Parliament. All they did was argue. It really feels like she should be coming up with actually very substantive things now.
That was her raison d'etre, wasn't it, when she was trying to get into the position that she's in? And one of the things that she did differently in lots of ways, she was saying to people, I'm not going to come at you now because I want this top job with all of these made-up policy positions. She was saying, and we're going to collectively figure out policies as we go forward. So people elected her on that basis of principles.
But this is the problem. There is nothing collective about the Conservative Party anymore. It is not one coherent unit. It is all completely divided. Brexit divided the Conservative Party, and the idea that they will suddenly, with Kemi Badenoch in charge, come together and create substantive policy that all the party will be behind, that will deal with the issues facing the country, I just don't think is going to happen. And I think that's actually why she was light on policy, because she knows there are fundamental issues in the party that they will not reconvene round.
And do you support Labour's position on this farming tax?
I think it's right to close a tax loophole that was being exploited by people with lots and lots of money, that artificially pushed up land values, made it much harder for farmers. I do understand the concern over how many farmers that is going to affect and what sort of level, what amount it's going to affect and how it's going to affect them. I think what we're seeing is a lot of confusion coming out of the Treasury, coming out of the IFS, coming out of various independent tax experts of actually actually how many family farms are going to be affected by this. It feels like in the protest yesterday that farmers thought across the stage they would all be affected, or they were standing in solidarity with other farmers. But I think the point is that actually farmers have been getting a bad deal out of the inflated cost of land, which has been pushed up by people using it as a means of avoiding tax. I don't think that's right. I don't think James Dyson shouldn't be paying his fair share. I agree with inheritance tax. I don't think it's double taxation. When you look at, for example, land value, that isn't something they worked for. That was artificially pushed up. Same with a lot of housing. You know, people have sat in housing that is completely grown in value. That isn't that hard work. That is the nature of having a dearth of supply.
The rise in house prices is simply a more honest measure of the rate of inflation than any of the others. Those of us who now have houses worth hundreds of thousands of pounds, which we didn't pay for them, we paid much less for them, but it cost us a lot of money to do so. Didn't intend for them to get them, but what then happens is they rise into tax brackets where the inheritance tax on them becomes a serious problem. That wasn't our doing. It's a product of inflation, as indeed is an awful lot of taxation, where a tax devised for very well-off people, the 40% tax, now hits police sergeants and nurses. It is an absurdity. The other point that people do need to realise is that the super rich don't pay tax. The only people who pay tax are the middle classes, people on PAYE and income. The super rich have enough lawyers to keep the tax man away from them. So all these things will have the huge unintended consequence of hurting the honest middle, leaving the super rich who are its alleged target untouched. Anybody who knows anything about tax knows this already. So when the Labour Party put forward this tax, they must have realised it's not the farmers' fault that the land on which they farm is now has a paper value which they can't touch, which doesn't make them rich, but which does suddenly make them liable to very heavy taxation. That's unfair.
I think it's absolutely true that, millionaires or multimillionaires or billionaires we're even talking about will always find ways to avoid tax. I think it's right that Labour is going after people who avoid tax. I think it's right that eventually through this
tax avoidance is legal.
But tax avoidance
buying
is legal,
buying premium bonds is tax avoidance, and taking out an ISA is tax avoidance. But it's perfectly legal, and people shouldn't be punished for it.
But Peter,
it will always, in a free society, it's not our job to give as much money as we possibly can to the government.
We can see the further destructive cause of this, though, when it inflates land values and makes it harder for farmers to do their job. I mean, that is the problem.
What inflates land values
is... Finish one second, Peter, please. If you push this to its logical conclusion, what will happen is you will see land being, potentially sold off. That will get it in the hands of younger farmers. It will break up those monopolies. Hopefully, in the long run, I agree, it's not a perfect solution. We don't know how many people are going to be affected. And I've got a lot of sympathy for people who are worried with family farms, but I do think it's good to have a policy that breaks up those monopolies.
If small farmers are put out of business by inheritance tax, the land will end up in the hands of big corporations, probably from abroad, almost certainly American. It won't result in young new farmers moving in. The reason for the huge inflation in the value of land is that people are cramming into assets because the value of money is shrivelling away, and the value of money is shrivelling away because of bad government policies, inflationary government policies which destroy the pound in your pocket every minute of the day and night.